Well, Paul, if you'll sit down, we can we can introduce your wife here. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Politics and Prose. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Alyssa Muscatine, and we've been eagerly awaiting this particular book talk for months. Susan Coll is not only a very accomplished local author, but also a friend of ours, and I know of many of you, and she was the first person that Alyssa and I hired after assuming ownership of P&P 11 years ago. And during Susan's 5 years on the staff here, she vastly expanded and improved P&P's events and other programming. And she recently returned part-time to help us revive our in-person talks following the easing of the pandemic. Yes, the pandemic has eased, although you wouldn't know it looking around it. Everybody's wearing masks. But anyway, Susan is back on board helping us. And now, if you've read Susan's 5 previous works, The Stager, Beach Week, Acceptance, Rockville Pike, and KarlMarx.com, you'll know she has a tendency to base her novels on personal experiences. So mindful of that, we secured assurances from Susan, multiple assurances while she worked here, that she'd never write a book about politics and prose. Her new novel, Bookish People, is set in a bookstore, and it's true, the bookstore isn't exactly P&P, so technically Susan has not broken her promise to us. But let's just say that Susan's tale about a fictional bookstore located in Washington, D.C., closely evokes life at Politics and Prose, and for that matter, at many other independent bookstores, which is what makes the book so entertaining and engaging. It captures the daily dramas, the assorted mishaps, the quirky staff, the eccentric customers, all of which make working or shopping in a bookstore a truly special experience. There's more than a little comedy among the chaos and casualties in Susan's book, and the protagonist, the recently widowed store owner Sophie Bernstein, has more than her share of misadventures amid, among other challenges, a monstrous malfunctioning vacuum cleaner, and yes, we do have here a sometimes temperamental vacuum cleaner, pets running amok, and a protest over the visit of a British poet who's suspected of causing his wife's suicide. So after reading Bookish People, you'll never look at P&P or other bookstores for that matter the same again. A review headline in the Washington Post called the book the perfect summer read for book lovers, and I definitely second that. Now, in conversation with Susan this afternoon will be Angie Kim, who also is a successful local novelist and also a great supporter of P&P. In fact, I don't know, this is like the third or fourth time in just the past few weeks that Angie has graciously agreed to moderate an event here. In an earlier career, she was a practicing trial lawyer, but she had a desire to write, and as things turned out, lots of talent for it. Her debut novel 3 years ago, Miracle Creek, is a fast-paced murder mystery that became a bestseller. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Susan and Angie.
So first of all, thank you everyone for coming out. What a great day to be in a bookstore and with you talking about your fabulous book. And Brad, you know that that book, Bookish People, is not based on P&P completely, because I actually did a search this afternoon, and your name was mentioned 3 separate times as the owner of a different, albeit very charming, DC bookstore, so we know that it's not PNP, right? But thank you so much for coming and having us out. And first of all, congratulations on this amazing launch of your 6th book.
Thank you, Angie, for doing this and being in conversation, and thank you, Brad, for that. Not just for that intro, but for tolerating this book, which it's true, I had no intention of writing, and we can get to the origins of it later, but I was really kind of terrified to show my all of my bookseller friends this book, and especially Brad and Melissa, so I'm really grateful to everybody for being so generous.
So I wanted to start by just bragging about you and this book for a little bit first. So first of all, Bookish People, which just came out this Tuesday, it received the Indie Next Pick, which to me is one of the highest honors that a book can get. And a bookseller from Beaverdale Books called it fast-paced, hilarious, and insightful. It's sure to appeal to anyone who works, owns, or shops in an indie bookstore. And I believe that's like pretty much everybody in the audience today. And then you also had a great review in the Washington Post this week, which called it witty and insightful and entertaining, and called the ending as satisfying as a trip to your local indie bookstore. And I love the Kirkus review, which talked about the wacky world of books and the people who love them as seen through a week in the life of a Washington, D.C. bookstore. As much fun as Coll has with vacuum cleaners, a truly surprising amount. And I have to say, I totally agree with that. It's literary humor where she slays. And so I just wanted to ask you to give us your own description of the book and maybe tell us a little bit about the origin story and hopefully give us a little taste of the humor by reading us a passage.
Sure. Yes, that Kirkus review might be my favorite all-time review. Well, the origin story, I'll take your questions out of order, really is the vacuum. And as I said, I had promised Brad and Melissa I wasn't going to write this book, and I took a leave of absence when I first left. It became a 5-year leave of absence, but I was still on the email distribution list, and I did tell people a couple times, I'm not really here, you might want to take me off the list, but they didn't, and so I was getting the end-of-day reports every day, which is a report sent by the store manager, just kind of wrapping up how things went, how the event went, how, anything notable to know for everybody working in the store. But it seemed like once a week, that might be a slight exaggeration, but very often there was a long, detailed memo about the status of the vacuum cleaner. And, it's in being repaired, hang on, it'll be back, whoops, the hose is clogged, be careful when you use it. And then I just started writing this novel. So that's where it came from. And
so the vacuum cleaner scene, or one of the many, is something that you started with. And did you think that it was going to become a novel at that point, or was that just something that you did as an exercise?
No, I knew it was going to become a bookstore novel. I didn't have a plot. It was, kind of a mess. I never really have a plot. My editor is here, and she just saw my mess of 100 pages with, it comes to me slowly. It's a messy process. But I knew the vacuum cleaner, the bookstore. I'm often start with settings. So
yeah, no, I love. Okay, so I needed to tell you, I was thinking maybe I shouldn't mention this, and it's all the way in the back of my notes. But at the very end of your book, for people who are buying the book, it's and you should buy it for your book clubs because it would be great for bookish people to discuss together. But there are some really helpful discussion questions at the end, and I just laughed out loud at this particular question: why are vacuum cleaners inherently funny, or parentheses, or are they? Do you have any home appliances of your own that seem ripe for comedy? And I was like, this is such a great book club question. I want my own book club to read it just so we can discuss that question. And I also have to answer that we have a robot vacuum at home, one of those. And my husband calls it the Decepticon. And like I was actually, I just did earlier today, I did a search through my text for Decepticon, and one of the most recent one from like 2 weeks ago was, I ran into the Decepticon and now it won't stop beeping and is about to get evicted to the garage again. And so I think this is something that happens to us a lot.
Well, just a random point of interest about e-robot vacuums, that I saw they were bought by Amazon today. So,
Really?
Just
I
throwing
did
that
not.
in.
Oh, that seems very prophetic or something. I don't know, or like an omen of something. Okay. So would you mind giving us a short description of the book and reading from it?
Yeah.
Because I want everybody to sort of experience the humor in your own voice.
Thank you. Yeah, the book is set the week of Charlottesville. And that week, like 10 days later, was the solar eclipse. So that just seemed like, I don't really know how I landed on that. That might have been about the time I started writing. But that seemed like a very symbolic week to me. And I also, even though it's a light bookstore comedy, I wanted to ground it in the reality of what we were all living through at that time. And it's about a bookstore owner who is starting to just lose her will to keep the bookstore going, and is also very frazzled and upset, as everybody was, about Charlottesville, and is thinking of selling the store, but at the same time she's thinking of barricading herself inside the store. And the premise is that when she first bought the bookstore, it had been attached to a bank, and there was this little space that nobody quite realized or ever claimed. So she's using that for her hiding place. And then lots of other daily insanity going on. I can read a short passage.
That would be great.
Let me think how to set that up. So this is a very short scene where Sophie, the owner, is in the store very early morning, trying to vacuum this nook where she's going to hide, but she has a lot of problems with this because the electricity blows out, the vacuum breaks. It's kind of an ongoing problem with getting it cleaned up. And so she's in the store. No, that is maybe not what I am going to read. Well, maybe, no. Anyway, yeah. I think that all bleeds into this scene. Okay. Before opening a bookstore, Sophie had not spent any time considering the physicality of books. She imagines that until they are engaged in the nuts and bolts of the business, few people do. Books are words and ideas and stories, but on a more practical level, assembled in carton quantity, they can weigh as much as 40 pounds. And that's not factoring in the oversized art or coffee table or cookbooks that, with their irregular sizes and pages of glossy photographs, can weigh even more. Cookbooks are where her troubles began. 4 years earlier, there was one in particular by an Israeli chef named Yotam Ottolenghi that was in such demand, no matter how many boxes they brought onto the book floor, they would quickly run out. One night during the Christmas rush, Sophie ran downstairs to retrieve a couple of boxes of Ottolenghis, and as she was descending, one of the booksellers yelled to her from the top of the stairs, and this is all based on a reality here, "Hey, Mrs. Bernstein, while you're down there, can you grab a box of vaginas?" in reference to the new Naomi Wolf book. Sammy found a box in the receiving room and added it to the pile in Sophie's arms, which is precisely when she felt the first spasm of pain in her shoulder. Thank you very much, Naomi. Now she's trying to remember whether, during her search for the stepladder, she had come across the extension cord. The vacuum, she assumes, is in the closet in the back of the staff break room. She begins to retrace her steps, preparing to rummage through the various storage spaces scattered discreetly around the store, when she hears a ringing telephone. A glance at her watch tells her it's now 6:27 a.m., too early for customers to be calling. Probably a robocall or a wrong number, but for some reason, maybe just habit, she picks it up. Sophie. It's a crusty male voice with a British accent, the vocal cords thick with what sounds like decades of nicotine. She knows this voice. She recognizes him before he identifies himself as Charlie Major, an old friend who owns an independent bookstore in North London. "Charlie, my goodness, how nice to hear from you. I haven't seen you since the London Book Fair in, when was I there? At least 5 years ago. How are you? How's the store doing? We're hanging on, Sophie. It's not the best of times for independence over here, but the lights are still on, and hang on, wait a minute, I was expecting to get your voicemail. I was about to send you an email, but figured I'd give you a ring in case you were there, and there you are. What the heck are you doing at the store so early in the morning? Oh, just catching up on some work, Sophie says, which is not entirely untrue, depending on your definition of work. She is, after all, preparing to vacuum. No need to tell him she's always up early now that Solomon is gone, now that she doesn't sleep. Mostly she just lies awake thinking too much, caught in a boring, repetitive anxiety loop. Nazis, loneliness, Michael, meeting payroll, Nazis, 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 also possibly squirrels in the attic chewing through the electrical cords. To what do I owe the honor of an old-fashioned transcontinental call?
So what I love about that passage is that in addition to the fact that we do get a taste of the vacuum humor, we also, see how you use humor. It's not just there for the laughs, although that's there. I laughed out loud so many times reading through this book. But it's there for us to make sense of what's happening. So this is a week, exactly 5 years ago, right? August 2017, right? It's 2022. I don't even remember. It's not the math. It's like what year are we in right now? And I think that week it was right after the Charlottesville attack, and I think it was such an awful time, and I think that you use humor to sort of bring out the absurdity in sort of that time period that we're, of course, still going through. And I think that it's really interesting how you manage to sort of take us from the sort of laugh out loud, like, even the audience, we were laughing, and then, the fact that she's thinking about Nazis, that's what we were doing. And I know that I use fiction that way, to sort of escape from, but also as a way to process. Can you talk about sort of how did you do that deliberately, or is that just something that comes naturally to you because you're just a funny person?
Well, I think two things. The word process is exactly right, and I've found in a lot of my books, they've emerged from wrestling with a subject, whether it's something as sort of light as college admissions. With my book Acceptance, I was driving myself crazy, watching all of these other parents drive themselves crazy. It's ridiculous. And as soon as I could just see how ridiculous I was being, I saw a comic novel. Right. And so in many ways, it's just a way of processing the reality. And, there's a lot to be said just about the relationship between dark times and comedy. There was an article recently about how comedy clubs have been springing up in Ukraine and bomb shelters. So I think, people just need that comic relief. And when things become so bad, sometimes they almost become self-satire, like this couldn't really be happening.
But and yet sometimes when the characters say it in a flat way, and you are laughing because you're like, well, that can't possibly be true. And then you step back and you're like, well, actually it is true. And that makes it more funny. And also, but it's the kind of funny where you're like laughing and crying at the same time,
Well, thank you for saying that. Well, the other answer to that is I never thought of myself as funny. I didn't set out to write comedy. I've really resisted that. My first novel, I thought I was writing a historical novel about Eleanor Marx, Karl Marx's daughter, who had committed suicide. I thought I was writing a kind of tragic historical novel, and every editor who looked at it said, well, this is really funny if you could just like pump up the comedy and cut this part out. So it's really only in this book, or maybe the last one, that I've kind of leaned into that, because I just want to be writing gorgeous literary fiction, and it doesn't work for me. It's the voice never works until it becomes funny. So
Well, and also the other part of the humor, other than the vacuum, that's a huge, theme throughout, is the tortoise named Kurt Vonnegut Jr. Would you like to tell us about the tortoise? Which I asked everybody at P&P the other day. I was like, so I know the vacuum cleaner thing is real, but what about the animals? And they were like, no, 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 no.
Oh yes, though I think you might have asked the newer booksellers. I see some of my former events colleagues there who remember the times, as does Brad. When I first started, we sat in many stressful staff meetings coming up with a pet policy because at the time you could bring your pet to work, which was great, except it started to there were a lot of pets and small offices, so and an incident or two. So there was a pet policy. So this tortoise, which two of the booksellers go after a party. They're a little tipsy and they go into a pet store in Fairfax, Virginia, and acquire a tortoise. But neither one of them really can keep the tortoise in their apartments. So it keeps winding up in the events closet over there. And I will say, as much as I tried to fictionalize this book, that events closet was pretty much like my compass as I wrote the book. A lot of action takes place in that closet.
And alongside the humor and sort of the ridiculous things that happen to some of these ridiculous but extremely lovable people, there's also kind of a mystery thread that was very suspenseful. And I was just like, late at night, I was just turning the pages. And the suspense comes, there's a lot. You just want to know what happens to these characters in general. But there is a woman named Clemmy who's, I think, 23, and she's, very smart and very serious and super, super intellectual and literary. And her mother is a literary agent, and one of her mother's clients that her mother is very close to is rumored to, who's coming to the bookstore, is rumored to have fathered someone who is around her age. So she's very curious to see how she can find out when he's at the store, whether he might be her father. And so I found this extremely suspenseful and just stressful. Tell us about this storyline.
Well, this is really great to hear, because this was a piece of the storyline that I never really knew what I was doing with that. I knew the premise, but I didn't know how to pace it and what to disclose when. So, this setup of this poet, which I don't know if I've mentioned the poet yet, but there's
I think Brad did, or I did, or Brad did, yeah.
Well, she's, they would have, another dilemma happening at the bookstore is whether to cancel this event, because people are very, very upset about the other bookstores have canceled him. This is before the cancel culture was even in our lexicon, which is I'm meandering here, but that's part of what was interesting to me in freezing this in time, because I didn't have to talk about that, and yet it also highlights that it was already part of the culture. So all the other bookstores are canceling his events, but Clemmy is not. She's insisting that they bring him to the store. So that's causing a lot of internal debates about, art and freedom of expression, and when you judge a writer by his personal life, so it raised all that. And because Clemmy wanted to see him in person, she was insisting on keeping the event.
And also, I think she, had some very thought-provoking ideas that you raised through various characters in the book about issues that I think still persist today, and and certainly is probably something that all booksellers have contended with. So, like, the one that you raised about whether the private life of an author should impact the way that person's work. is, you know, read and received, and maybe welcomed or not. I mean, that's a huge issue that some of the characters that Sophie, certainly the bookstore owner, has to contend with. And, you know, and there are books that have portions that offend some readers and long-standing, you know, members of the community. So those are some other things. And so these are some serious issues that these characters are dealing with. And I felt like because you had different characters sort of thinking about them, and because of the humor, it never came across as you, the author, you know, of this book, telling us what we should think. But I am curious sort of how you wanted to present that and what your own thoughts are about some of these issues.
Yeah, I mean, I did want to present that, and I hadn't worked here for about 5 years, and then I came back, and my very first week here, we had something like that come up with an event we saw was on the calendar, and I opened the New York Times, and like, oh my God, what, you know, but yeah, I mean, these are very complicated questions, and I probably don't have the bandwidth to fully answer it here, but I certainly err on the side of wanting, you know, to have freedom of speech and not, you know, let authors say what they, you know, present their work. And there's a line, and in my head I know what that line is, but it's a little hard to articulate.
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting is that you give different characters the sort of room to say what they themselves think, and you present different facets so that we can sort of think about these issues alongside with you. And, you know, which is what I think one of the things that you are able to do, because you do have different narrators take over different sections of the book. So that's actually something that I wanted to talk to you about as well. Not just giving the story to Sophie, who's the bookstore owner, who would have been a choice, but you also allow other characters the room to sort of tell their own stories and spotlight them as characters. Did you write those in the order in which they appear, or did you sort of focus on the one more than the other at different times? Would love to hear your sort of thoughts about that writing process.
Yeah, I very much wanted to get the bookseller point of view in there. And, you know, in a way, as a writer, I felt I've never owned a bookstore, but I felt like I understood both aspects, in part maybe just because I'm, you know, older than most of the booksellers I was working with. So I felt that generational gap. Maybe I didn't feel it as much as I should have. They probably felt it more than I did, but I was aware of that aspect. But I also sort of had the job more or less that Clemmy had, so I wanted to be able to write from the point of view of a bookseller. And then the most fun I had, but also the biggest challenge I had, and again, my editor's sitting right here, and I can see, even with the mask on, her facial expression. My favorite part of the book is writing this horrible poet. I do like to write dark.
I love that so much. Yeah, I love that. I thought that would have been really fun.
Yeah, but there was a lot of him, and there was probably too much of him. So we took some out, we put some back in, and in the end, I think hopefully it worked out. But it's fun to just write, you know, just put on a completely different hat and write from the point of view of this misogynistic, horrible, drunk poet, so who's like completely oblivious to his own behavior. So.
And did you write them sort of all at the same time? So you wrote all of, you know, his Chaucer's, the poets, you know, sections all in one period, and then move from, or did you just sort of go from one character to another?
No, I just wrote it kind of in the chronology that it appears.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
I kind of admire writers who can break it down and sort of know that they want to do a character study, or I don't. Again, it's just kind of a messy
Yeah, no, I do the same thing. I have to go sort of in order that I think it's going to appear in the book. And of course, and then at the end, you're like, well, actually, that's not the order at all.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter what I did.
You had multiple.
Yeah, I had 7, which I don't recommend to other people.
Well, let's talk about that.
No. Okay, so let's talk about. I want to ask you, just because he's sitting right here. I want to ask you about the amazing piece that you wrote for Lit Hub about the meeting cute in the bookstore. We have to talk about that. And I warned you I was going to ask you about that. Okay, tell us the story for those in the audience who haven't read the Lit Hub piece. Tell us the story. It's so cute.
Well, thank you. I wrote a very personal, maybe overly personal essay.
No such thing.
Took a lot to write, but I wrote it in part because I felt like it kind of explained the book from a different angle, and it also kind of explained why I'm here, and even why I'm back here again, and why I love it here so much. I really do. I just could tear up. I love this bookstore, and but I started working here during a very difficult period of my life. I was going through, my marriage was falling apart, and I had never really had a job. I'd been writing novels, and I'd been freelancing, but I hadn't had a job, with health insurance and a retirement plan and all of those things since I was in my 20s. And Brad and Lissa were buying the store, and I knew them a little bit through Washington Post connections and mutual friends. And I just got this idea to write them this very long memo about all these ideas I had for community events and expanding events and creating classes. And they hired me, which was really surprising because I didn't really know what I was doing, but I had a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of time. And so I wrote a short essay for Lit Hub about that difficult time and how working in this bookstore really got me through all of that, because I just be here, and it's all consuming. You could live here. You really could live here. And then I also explained about this very serendipitous and kind of funny coincidental narrative of meeting my husband, Paul, who's right here. And he had actually, I described the stress of the events job. And at the time I was working with Sarah Boleen, who kind of taught me how to do the job. She was here before I was. And we would just be like, I remember Sarah said, do we have to do this book? And I looked at it and I'm like, no, we don't have to do it. Because it was already out, and our calendar's so crowded that by the time we could book the event, it would be 5 months old. So we just said no. And then I went on a date, and this guy says, I told him where I worked after deciding he wasn't the lunatic he sort of seemed to be. And he said, oh, that's funny, I have a new book out. I just got turned down for an event. And so that's our origin story, and there's a little more to it.
I love, but you have to tell the thing that you end with, the kismet thing. Yeah, the coincidence. I don't think it's coincidence. I think it's like fate and kismet and all these things.
Yeah, I think it really might be. So we obviously got together. I moved into his house. I felt like I'm one of those people who has to alphabetize and organize books. And he had a lot of books, but they were a big, dusty mess. And he's got Russian books mixed in with the English language. And I needed to fix this. And Sarah sitting next to him was 14 at the time, and she was looking like, who is this crazy woman? I took every book off the shelf. So we reorganized them, and it was a good way to talk about what books we loved and find our mutual book loves. And he wanted to show me one of his favorite comic novels called The Good Soldier Schweik. And he couldn't find it anywhere. We were combing through the house. He was getting very upset. This went on a few weeks, and I was saying, I work in a bookstore. Let me just get you. I'll order it. I'll special order it. No, I want my book. So we eventually found it in Sarah's room somewhere. And he brought it to me, and I opened it, and he had a bunch of ephemera in the crease and stuff fell out, including an airline menu to just demonstrate that he'd been traveling. And I used to write for a couple different international newspapers. This was like 25 years ago. And my byline fell out of the book, half my byline, because he'd ripped it off because he wasn't interested in my article, which was about the recession in European restaurants. He ripped it out, I'm assuming, because there was a review of Richard Powers' Operation something book from a long time ago. And so we were like, couldn't believe this coincidence. But then I didn't even realize it right away. I looked at it again, and it's the date. The byline date is the date of our wedding anniversary. So there is some kismet there. There's even another kismet story, but well, that's enough for one.
Okay, all right, yeah. After we've had some wine, we'll do that. I love that. I love that kismet story. I think it's great, and yeah, no, I'm so glad that you told that story, and I think it's so wonderful. And okay, all right, but that's the kind of stuff that's in the book too. Like there is, because of the solar eclipse, and there are characters that believe in, weird cosmic fate kinds of things and things like that. So I think it goes along with the book. Okay, so another one that it's now getting to be the time when I need to actually encourage you guys to come and ask questions. So please come to the microphone and go ahead and line up and ask any questions that you would like. And while you're all doing that, hello. I'm going to ask a couple of more questions. We have one. All right, great.
Hi.
Hello.
Yes, hi Susan.
Hi, Mike.
Congratulations on
Thank
publishing this novel, and I'm looking forward to reading it. So I'll just ask you a process question about your experience writing the book. So can you talk about how long it took you to write it, how many drafts you went through, how your editor worked with you to shape it? Can you just tell us about the genesis of the novel?
Thanks, Mike. Mike's writing a novel, too. That's very good. I want to talk to you more about that. This took a long time. I don't know. It doesn't look like it should have taken a long time, but maybe because I didn't really know much more than the setting. Probably I started working on it, I'm guessing, around the time of Charlottesville. So, but it went through a lot of drafts, and I lost confidence in it many times. I will credit Paul, my husband, for keeping me going. He kept saying, no, this is really funny, but I couldn't really see it. So many drafts, and then even once it was sold, Kim gave me the best notes I've ever had on a book and another very quick rewrite, and it finally felt like it all came together. But I also showed it to so many people in this room, Liz and Abby, former events colleagues over there, and probably other people here that I'm not spotting, but they were just really helpful in both giving me the confidence that it was okay to write this book. I just felt like I didn't want to be kind of appropriating our time here. I felt very self-conscious of that, and just wanted to know how booksellers would feel about the book. So it took a long time. That's not a terribly coherent question, but many drafts.
Yeah. Actually, and other people should come up, feel free to come up too, but that leads me to the fact that you're also writing a book, leads me to one of the questions that I had that we were discussing. So Sophie, the bookseller, says she notices how everyone she meets in the bookstore wants to write a book, right? Like everybody's like, I'm working on a book, or I have a novel idea, and blah, blah, blah. And I just wanted to see, I was curious, in the audience, maybe I should ask who's not writing. Okay, no. Who is either working or on or wants to write a book? I'd say what, 60%, 50%? A good 50%. Okay, yeah, okay. We were just curious.
Well, a lot of my students are here and friends, so it's slightly skewed population.
That's great. And then another one that I thought was so interesting that Sophie brings up is that Sophie says, the bookseller says, the world is divided into two kinds of people. Those who think, and it's a type of reader, those who think that books are for reading when there's nothing better to do, and those for whom reading is central, and other things that get in the way of reading are the annoyances of life, right? And that's obviously true for me. And I guess I wanted to just ask you, as a bookseller, do you think you can tell, like when you're talking to customers that walk in, can you tell like who they are, and do you steer the two types of people to different types of books, do you think?
That's a good question. I think I should probably defer to people who are on the floor more than I am. But when I worked here previously, I was on the floor a fair amount and always worked the holidays. And yeah, I think you can tell, because they'll either come in and they know what they're looking for, and it's going to be something like Richard Powers' book from 25 years ago. They know what they're looking for, or they're looking for something serious and specific. And then there's the readers who, there's a lot of crossover, and I don't mean to make any generalizations, but are just like, I have a long plane ride, and what can I read to kill the time? So yeah.
Interesting. Yes, we have a question.
Hello.
Hi, Susan. Congratulations.
Thank
So
you.
I do remember about the question. I remember I took your novel class when I was pregnant with my son. He's now 3. And I remember you were almost done with the book then. So
Okay, you can
it
help
was,
me with my timeline. I don't remember.
but I think you stand out for your longevity in the publishing business, that you have published, this is your 6th book. And you mentioned that you had wanted, or you had doubts. And I guess I'm curious, have you ever given up on a book, or when do you know, how do you know when to push forward and when to give up and move on to the next thing?
Yeah, thank you, Pang. That's a good question. Even though this is my 6th book, every book feels like a huge challenge, and like I'm done. I'm never going to get another book published. It's a challenging business too, to break into and then to stay alive in publishing. And I've discarded many books. I have a first novel that I never tried to publish. I have another novel that I co-wrote with a friend that I never tried to, I didn't try to publish it, and I just went back to it, thought, this is not bad, but I've discarded a lot of early drafts of things that I'll just start to play with, and they don't feel like they're working. So yeah, it's never easy. I really admire, I was at a dinner with some writers that the publisher had put together after a conference recently, and I seem to be the only one at the table who doesn't outline books and who isn't able to produce a book a year, and I really admire that, but I can't write that way, and I'm not kidding when I say I lost confidence in this book a few times along the way, so, but thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? People feel free to come up, but I just wanted to comment on that. I do not outline. I cannot outline. I've tried to outline, and it's really, and people, if you're trying to write a murder mystery and you don't outline, it's a very, very long process. I, again, don't recommend it. I don't recommend anything I do in writing, but unfortunately, there it is. And you said, this just from, and I'm guessing you're thinking of the length of the book, that it shouldn't have taken you that long, but I don't think that's true, because, I'm guessing that, how many words do you think you threw out in, producing this? This is what, 85,000, 90,000 words or something like that. I would guess you threw out a good 100,000 more.
Yeah, yeah.
So
yeah.
it's that it's the distilling down to the best, stuff that I think is, is what takes a really long time.
And it's reassuring to hear that's your process as well.
Oh yeah, no, but I think we all need to tell each other the secrets of our processes, right? So that we don't feel horrible about our own.
I'll give a plug, since I work here again. In the fall, we're having a class with Sarah Pekkanen, who, I don't know if she's here, but she was very generous with this book, and she writes thrillers, and she's doing a class on writing thrillers, and she she's very good at being able to outline. So
She also co-writes with other people, right?
she
With,
does now, but,
yeah,
but
okay.
also on her own.
Okay. Yeah. I think that if you were writing with another person, you would kind of have to, but I think that would be fun. It's sort of like being in a TV show writer's room.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of TV shows, can you tell us like any fun stories about your book Acceptance that was made into a movie with Joan Cusack, who's one of my favorite actresses. She's so funny. Can you like give us some tidbits about that?
Yeah,
That would be so fun.
I don't really have a lot because I didn't go down to watch it being filmed. I wish I had. Now I really regret it. But apparently I think there was a lot of drama going on the set, and they seemed to not really want me. A couple times I said maybe I'll come down. They're like, oh, it's not the best time. But and I didn't write the script either, so I was a consultant. So I didn't play a very big role other than to try to correct some technical college admissions mistakes. But I loved Joan Cusack. I couldn't believe how funny she was. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it must be so fun to sort of see characters that you've created and storylines that you've thought up, actually on a screen played by somebody that you really admire like that.
Yeah, and it also taught me about writing screenplays in the sense that I don't think I could have written that, even though I'd already written the book, because they inverted it. They took one of the characters who was not the main character and made her the main character, and she narrated the movie, and they sort of drew out a piece of the humor that made it more central. The screenwriter did a fantastic job, and I don't think I could have done that. I was too close to it to be able to.
I mean, I think it's so funny because my editor for the book that I'm writing now, he's a novelist too, and both of his novels have been made into movies and TV shows and things, and he says what you should do with your book if you are an author, a novelist, is just let it go, sort of like a grandmother or a grandfather, like a grandparent. You need to just just be proud and happy that they're there in the world and being taken care of by, good care by other people, but you yourself want nothing to do with the day-to-day raising of those children, that type of thing, which I think is really good advice.
I was also given the kind of inverse of that advice by my then agent. If it's terrible, you'll have had nothing to do with it.
That's true. That is true too. We have a question.
Well, I just wanted to say that Susan is sort of a inspiration in some ways, and the very first time I met her, she gave me this inspiration, which was she had just researched at great length Stalin's daughter. And I was so interested in talking to her about Stalin's daughter. I didn't realize Stalin had a daughter. I thought the whole idea she could research this person. And she turned it in, and the publisher said, well, we don't really think this should be a biography. We think this would maybe be, I forget whether it was a mystery or whether it ought to be funny. Anyway, and it turned out she had to rewrite it over and over again. But anyway, when they told her that they wanted her to completely start over and make it into a totally different kind of book, she said, I can do that. And I think that's an inspiration to all of us.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Judy. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that is a huge inspiration, because I think that shows, when you get to know your characters and your settings so well, that the fact that, you can use different drafts to do different things, to get to know your characters and to get to know that world better. And so I think that is really, but still at the same time, it must have been kind of like a bummer, no?
Yeah, I did that because I believe that, most editors are good editors, and that it's better you can always improve it. I do sometimes look at that book and have some regrets, though. I really that's my first novel, and it was very hard to get it published. And when it finally was catching at a big publisher, I was like, I will do anything to get this book out in the world. And I'm proud of it, but it wasn't the book I wanted to write. I did want to write this story. I managed to keep the Marx story in there. I did have one editor who would have been like a dream editor to work with, who wanted me to cut the whole thing out. I'm like, well, but that's what the book is. This is what it's about. So I did not take every opportunity that came along, but you know, I learned from it that comedy is more where I should be going. So if it had worked, it would have sold. So it wasn't working.
Well, you are very, very funny. But also, I wanted to ask you, as a bookseller, so as somebody who has, you know, sort of toehold in this community and who sort of like, you know, comes into this physical space, you know, a lot. Do you think that inspires your writing? And what is your sort of day-to-day writing process? Like, do you have a certain number of words or certain number of hours, and does that correlate in any way to your, you know, to being here?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I have a counterintuitive answer, I think, to the first part of that, because I started working here and I had a novel, you know, about to come out, The Stager. And I was very nervous about being here and seeing galleys floating around and just thinking, you know, these are, you know, some of the best readers in the world at this amazing bookstore, and I was just afraid to have people reading it. But I also was able, in my role of, you know, an events person and looking at our inventory system and seeing the numbers of books that come in and go out, it's just inventory. And that kind of took the pressure off the whole thing. Like, to me, this is my life's work, and here it is, and I'm like, you know, crying on the page. But at the end of the day, like, it could be shoelaces coming in. Oh, we've got too many red shoelaces, let's ship them back. So it made me feel kind of better about the whole endeavor.
Oh my God, I didn't think of that. It gives you perspective on that and makes you,
And as for the process, I think I was a little more disciplined during that phase because I just had more time. I was this was all I was doing, and I was living alone, and I had a lot of time and discipline. Right now I'm doing a lot of different things. Some of my Faulkner colleagues are here, and I love being on the board, and it takes a lot of my time, and I'm back here because I love it here, but I really don't have a lot of time, and I'm teaching. I have a lot of my students are here, and writing. I have another book deadline, so I'm doing too many things so I need to find the discipline. It's also hard right now with all this book stuff going on.
Right, of course. Yeah. We have another question.
Hello.
I should fess up. I'm one of those students,
Yeah.
and Susan, this is a sort of, I hope it's a flattering question, but how do you do it? I should tell everybody here. Susan is the most incredible teacher. She really is. I mean,
Nick.
absolutely astonishing. She's
that means a lot. Thank you.
yeah, she's generous with her time. She's insightful. She's thoughtful, and she's quirky. So, and what I particularly like is that, I mean, I'm an obsessive. When you start to get too detailed, and when you can't do this because that, she'd sort of say, "Oh, for God's sake, just keep going." Anyway, Susan, my question really is about your self-discipline. How do you do it all? Because not only are you so productive as an author, but you're also so active in terms of helping others in their writing, and then professionally, you're on all sorts of boards and committees and things. How do you do it? How do you keep all that stuff going?
Well, thank you. I do try to be disciplined about each day and just kind of looking at the day and where can I find the pocket of time to write for a couple of hours. And I just try to be very organized and just make that the priority, which I'll be doing again very soon, to find the time to write. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of all the various things I'm doing I love, and they all kind of feed into keeping me going and remembering why I'm doing this. I love, part of why I'm back working here. I love the reader in me loves just working in this environment, and I love that as much as I love the writing part, and sometimes think I could do, one or the other. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but I just try to be very organized.
Okay, when you say one or the other, somehow you do both. So
Yeah.
thanks.
Exactly.
Thanks, Nick.
So I think we have time for one more question, which is going to be mine, which is, what are you working on? What can you tell us anything about the next book, or especially with your editor here and things?
I'm working on a book. It doesn't sound very funny, but I keep assuring her that there will be humor emerging eventually. I've been for a long time, since I started working here, because of, I think it was from a former employee here who had mentioned this to me, Lars. We all remember Lars. He had told me about the Mothman, the myth of the Mothman, which stems from, in part, I don't know the full history of it, but most recently in American imagination, it came from this terrible bridge collapse that occurred in 1967 in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. So I'm trying to capture that story from the point of view of someone who was a survivor of that, but also get at the whole why her moth obsession and the Mothman myth. So we'll see.
Okay. Very,
we'll see
very,
what happens.
very, very cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing
you,
all of
Angie.
this with
Thank you
us.
so much.
Thank you for Politics and Prose.
Thank you.
Brad.
Thank you very much, Susan and Angie. Copies of Susan's book are available at the checkout desk. She'll be up here, delighted to sign. Just form a line to the right of the table and help our staff by folding up your